Right. Okay. So the general idea is mediation in the Middle East. Where is it going, and why do I think that there is an exciting future for it? I will say at the outset that there are people who would disagree. Certainly, there are practitioners, arbitration practitioners and litigators who may disagree as to the timing of how quickly mediation will take hold. I'm quite happy to have a debate with them about that in due course. But in the interim, this is my my position, my thoughts, and some of them are unsubstantiated. It is an opinion. Everybody's entitled to one, and because this is so new, you know, one person's idea about mediation and how it will grow in the Middle East is just as valid as the other, because it's untested so far, or at least relatively untested. My background is quite straightforward and quite complicated in many respects. I started off life as a linguist. I did my first degree in classical Arabic, and then went traveling, and during that time started worrying about what to do when it came to finding a job. An old friend of the family persuaded me that law might not be a bad idea, and that I could probably find a way of combining my love of language with a career, and law has certainly served me very well in that respect. Why am I supporting International Mediation Awareness Week? Well, quite simply because I think mediation is going to grow arms and legs very quickly, not just on a national level. And I appreciate that many of you operate on a national level, but I think on an international level as well. What am I going to cover in this presentation? Well, I'm going to cover a number of things. I'm going to cover mediation itself, its background in the culture in the Middle East, and also the possibilities for mediation not to be used simply as a means of alternative dispute resolution, but thinking outside of the box, how it may have commercial implications, application beyond dispute resolution. So mediation in the Middle East. Mediation has been entrenched in various capacities in the Middle East. As one expects of a barter society, and a society that for a long time was tribal, the use of middlemen has been invaluable to ensuring people remain on a basis where they can trade with one another and resolve disputes appropriately. We will look shortly at some principles of mediation that are enshrined in Islamic law. However, we will also look at why they're slightly different in terms of mediation as we understand it as trained mediators in the UK. So let's talk about a few things that have happened on an international scale. And obviously, we're all aware of how geopolitical mediation has been used as a means of exerting influence over different countries and jurisdictions. You only have to look at the way that America and China and Russia have behaved, and sometimes they have got their way and they have been able to exercise additional influence over a region through mediation with the rulers. But once mediation has failed, there have been occasions when they've gone in with full force and achieved their goal of control, or at least partial control in that way. I'm not proposing to speak about geopolitical mediation because it's far removed from what we're really interested in talking about here. Now, what I am interested in talking about is the Singapore Convention, because for many people, this is seen as an absolute game changer. It's been mentioned before, and some of you may well have been at the session, that it's been heralded as the most important step towards making mediation a recognised tool for international mediation and the resolution and enforcement of mediation awards across a wide variety of jurisdictions. There are currently 46 signatories, of which 3 only are in the Middle East, where my area of interest is, although through my sources I understand that a further 2 jurisdictions are going to join up quite quickly. It provides for mediation agreements and mediation awards to be enforced directly in those countries. And it provides a general framework, although not in a prescriptive manner, for the countries who wish to adopt the convention to incorporate into their domestic legislation provisions for mediation and holding mediations internally. Saudi, where I'm based, signed on to the convention on the 5th of May 2020, and that should have now come into force with effect from the 5th of November. As you can see from that and the dates, we're still very much talking about a concept, i.e. mediation, which is in its very early stages in my part of the world. I'm moving on to the next slide yet. Just like to explain to you the Islamic principles of mediation, or some of them. A long history has been established of mediation, going all the way back to the times of the Prophet, peace be upon him. These principles do differ from the principles we're accustomed to, but they also give a nod to how mediation may develop in certainly the Middle East and North Africa in future. So the first concept is called al-wasata, which basically means being the middleman. And here you had a situation where there was a dispute which parties couldn't agree on, obviously. So they explained both their positions to the gentleman who was going to hear the dispute, who typically would have been a tribal elder, and he would then listen to the parties and advise them as to the result, which was a more compelling argument. So unlike a mediator, they took an active role in the decision-making process. And similarly, the two other concepts, one called sulh and the other called masalaha, both of these were dispute resolutions typically used where there were difficulties between tribes and issues over things like the ownership of wells, which was obviously a vital aspect of life in the Gulf and the Gulf states, and remains so today. So these people would come in and assist in the resolution of the disputes. I think in the case of al-Wasata, that's more akin to an arbitrator, a sole arbitrator. But my point for including these is that the concept of looking to third parties who were wise, who were in understood key decisions, the idea was, sorry, I'm thinking a few times ahead. The idea was that these people would be brought on board, and the parties and the tribes that they represented would accept them as being independent. Some of these concepts of Islamic mediation are enshrined in various legal systems. In the UAE, they do have provision for mediation, but that was supplemented by the passing of two laws, one at federal level and one at Dubai level, where they actually created mediation centres. There are also examples of other countries that have taken steps to create arbitration and mediation centres. The success of those has been patchy. Arbitration centres tend to be the ones that are preferred currently, but mediation is kind of tagged on. And I'll just talk you through what happens in Saudi Arabia, because I think it's probably one of the better examples. The point I wanted to make about mediation was that mediation is very close to facilitation. And we're not talking about facilitation here in terms of the US anti-bribery rules. We're talking here as a means of getting parties to an agreement when they have not been able to come to agreement on key points. And therefore, there is the possibility of a growth of the use of mediation being seen to be in conjunction with the growth of facilitation, where independent third parties get injected at the pre-contract stage for companies. All right. Right. I mentioned before that there were principal differences and challenges in the development of mediation in the Middle East. The first is the role of the mediator and his mandate. As I've just explained, the mediator used to be in the Middle East, used to be someone who was empowered by two sets of disputing parties, given the information about what was in dispute, and he was expected to be an expert in that, and then sit and preside over a dispute resolution session and encourage the parties and lead the parties to a result. We are accustomed to a totally different role, which is that we have no vested interest whatsoever in the outcome. Therefore, we must retain at all times complete confidentiality when we're talking to each of the parties during the course of mediation. We must remain impartial and not be seen to favour one or the other party, even if one party may have a manifestly stronger argument than the other. We have to remain completely neutral. So that is a considerable distinction between the historical role of a mediator in the Middle East and the present one that we understand our role to be. As a result of that, there are legal issues that potentially arise if you're a foreign mediator coming into the Middle East at the request of a party to conduct mediation. Now, I've spoken to a few people, and they do see that due to the clients they have dealings with on a day-to-day basis, that there may be cause for them to come and conduct mediation in the Middle East. I don't see why that in principle should be a problem, but there need to be the mediators need to be cognizant of these historical differences, and also they need to be cognizant of possible legal issues which arise under Islamic law when it comes to arriving at a resolution between the parties. There are two principal legal issues to overcome in the context of an Islamic mediation. The first is called riba, which is often translated as usury, but I prefer an alternative translation as being unjustified profit. If the result of an arbitration were to result in one party taking away an unjustified amount from that mediation and from the underlying contract that was being discussed, then there may be an issue of enforcement, particularly if it was necessary to execute the judgment by the client in the court of the jurisdiction in which the mediation takes place. The second major hurdle to arriving at a mediation settlement would be the concept of gharar, which again has been translated by some as gambling, but to me a fairer translation is uncertainty. Now, if you think about the types of commercial contracts that we may deal with, there are a number that are inherently uncertain at the time of entering into, due to the potential outcomes and the circumstances that could bring into play those contracts. Of note are insurance contracts, derivatives, collateral debt obligation type contracts, foreign exchange contracts, and such like. I think it is fair to say that it would be very difficult to mediate problems that arise under this type of contract in the Islamic context. I don't know. I'm not aware of one having come to mediation as yet, but it would be interesting to see how, if it goes to mediation and then a party seeks to execute the judgment against the other party, how the courts would view this. Okay, well, I seem to have come quickly, but not so quickly on to the wrap up. I think it's fair to say that mediation is relatively new in the Middle East and has come about as a kind of younger brother to arbitration. So just for your information, the following countries have implemented various rules and regulations about arbitration, although some of them are not particularly well defined at the moment. So as far back as 2006, both Jordan and Qatar passed laws. In the case of Jordan, they passed a law for mediating the resolution of civil disputes. Qatar in 2006 set up the International Centre for Commercial and for Conciliation and Arbitration, and subsequently changed that to include mediation rules, which were both based on those of UNCTRAL. So after 6 years, it made that change, having identified a potential area within the law that it could exploit. We've already spoken about Dubai. One area we haven't spoken about in relation to Dubai is the Dubai International Arbitration Centre, and that in 2009 set up the mediation centre as well. And some of the free zones, DIFC and ADGM, they have their own sets of rules. In the case of DIFC, their mediation rules, which are clearly stated on the website if anyone would like to look them up afterwards, was published in 2009. And then the Dubai Multi-Commodities Centre had a mediation centre. I don't actually know the date of when this was set up, but I can find out if anyone's particularly interested. And that was used principally for resolving employment disputes. Finally, in 2010, Bahrain set up the Chamber for Dispute Resolution, and this was based on the American Arbitration Association rules. So there has been a lot of movement towards alternate dispute resolution, and slowly the mediation is becoming something which is part of potential litigants' conscious, as opposed to just straightforward, right, we're either going to litigation or arbitration. That's it, it's the end result. I feel very positive that in a post-COVID era where everything around us has changed and the whole way that we're going to be doing business with one another has changed, or if it hasn't changed, it will have to change. That mediation is going to become much more used because it's cheaper, it's faster. Ultimately, it places the outcome and the process of mediation in the hands of the competent parties. And also, it maintains the ability of the two parties to get over the hump and retain a solid business relationship. I also am a passionate believer that mediation, in terms of what would be described as facilitation, can be used up front as a proactive tool. And over my 25 years in the Middle East, I've seen negotiations stumble over minor points that needn't have arisen. And some of those have been due for cultural reasons. Some of them have been down to the brass tacks of understanding what taking on board those obligations are. And a mediator stroke facilitator could help the parties overcome these issues and fulfill a very important role in making the business relationships start off on a far more solid footing, which of course in the longer term ought to mean that there is less need for mediation, arbitration and litigation. That's possibly pie in the sky, but I thought it was worth sharing my view on how mediation stroke facilitation could be used in the future. So I think that's everything I want to say. I'm very happy to take questions, and you will see from the talk that there should be a lot of optimism in mediation and where it's going in the Middle East. There have been strides made already, particularly in the free zones, and the free zones in particular in the UAE, but also mainstream jurisdictions like Saudi Arabia have made very large strides in the establishment of the Saudi Center for Commercial Arbitration, which also has its own detailed mediation rules. That the Middle East is beginning to take mediation extremely seriously, and it has a precedent for that in its history. So I think we're going to see some quite radical changes in the Middle East, certainly in my the remainder of my working life, and I hope some of the younger people that have kindly attended this session will be able to make careers in mediation in the Middle East or working with the Middle East in the future.